So thanks to all of you who are still here. I was so engaged with Johnny's presentation and the chat from my English colleagues that I almost want to start a fight about Scottish television drama, but I'll concentrate on my own theme, which is Play for Today and Northern Ireland, which I think is going to raise different questions from the rest of the day. It raises questions about representation of a particular region or sub-state. But because of what was happening in the 70s, I think it raises questions that don't really apply to other plays. In the 1970s, there was a conference and 1980 in which Trevor Griffith, who wrote a number of Play for Days, lamented the lack of plays about Northern Ireland and thought it was a kind of disgrace that British television wasn't making more plays about Northern Ireland. And that, along with a South Bank show that Richard Hoggart made, there's been a perception amongst critics and scholars that there were no Northern Ireland plays during the 70s, and it's become a kind of lost or forgotten decade. And what I want to suggest in this paper is that that's not strictly true. The numbers of plays about Northern Ireland were not substantial, but for me, they do represent a very interesting and eclectic bunch. Why were there so few plays in the 1970s? Well, I think there's two questions here. We've just had presentations on the English regions, presentation on Scottish drama and BBC Scotland. By comparison, there was no local TV drama production in Northern Ireland. During the 1960s, Northern Ireland only had a small studio and it only made a few 30-minute plays. Any plays about Northern Ireland that were made in the 60s were produced in London, but they themselves were pretty much rare. My former colleague, Martin McLuhan, puts it this way: the totally marginal place occupied by Northern Ireland in the culture and politics of Britain in the 1960s was really the explanation for the absence of interest in making plays or programmes about the north of Ireland, which was, in the conventional language, placed apart. Now, this began to change in the 1970s because there's no doubt that suddenly the conflicts in the north of Ireland imposed themselves on British culture in a way they hadn't been for several decades. But that also gave rise to a separate set of questions, which again didn't really apply. We have discussed issues around censorship today, particularly the banning of plays like Brimstone and Treacle and Scum. But it has to be said that Northern Ireland was a particularly sensitive issue. The British Army had put boots on the ground, as it were, in 1969. The British state was directly involved in an armed conflict in Northern Ireland, and media coverage of Northern Ireland was incredibly sensitive, and all sorts of programmes, news, current affairs, documentary and drama were subject to scrutiny, regulation and censorship. And often the explanation for the rarity of productions about Northern Ireland in the 70s is the fact that it was just too risky or too difficult to get programmes made. To give you an example of the difficulties that did occur, the first play to tackle the conflict from a historical perspective in the 1970s was the play I've already briefly introduced, and a play I'm a great enthusiast for, Dominic Behan's Carson Country, directed by Piers Haggart. Dominic Behan, by the way, is the less well-known brother of Brendan Behan, probably better known for his folk singing and his composition of the song The Patriot Game, which was subsequently pinched by Bob Dylan and given new lyrics. However, he did write a number of significant television dramas in the 70s, particularly working with Piers Haggart on a regular basis. Carson Country, it was recorded in February 72, but it was not transmitted until October. The reasons for the delays was that nobody really wanted to show it in the BBC. It was referred to the controller of BBC Northern Ireland, who decided that it shouldn't be broadcast for the time being. The BBC Director General even referred the play to Willie Whitelaw, the then Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, to judge his opinion about whether this play for today should be broadcast. I don't think many play for todays had quite this level of political scrutiny. The argument for this sensitivity was both political bias. This Dominic Behan came from a Republican family, and although it's an openly socialist class-based play, there was kind of reluctance to broadcast it because of Behan's political affiliations. But it was also, and this was the argument that was repeatedly rolled out, that plays about Northern Ireland could inflame the local population and that be rioting in the streets. And therefore there's a kind of excessive exaggeration of what the power of drama could be, that a play by Dominic could be and could, as it were, lead to fighting in the streets. The other notorious case of censorship in the 70s was one that we've already had mention of in the interview with Margaret Matheson. This is the Legion Hall bombing. Again, this was made in February 78, and we heard from Margaret that it was delayed from August 1978. Again, there was extreme political sensitivity about this and fear that it was going to provoke difficulty. Its subject matter was clearly controversial. It recorded and was basically a transcription of part of a Diplock Court juryless trial that had been held. And Willie Gallagher, who was the convicted bomber, was widely regarded as being innocent and convicted on the basis of evidence that hadn't been tested before the jury. What happened was the voiceover at the beginning was rewritten by the controller of BBC Northern Ireland, and the epilogue that Carol Churchill and Roland Joffe had written was removed altogether. And as we heard this morning, they removed their names from the credits. The BBC said again, they were concerned about the editorializing of the drama, the imposition of a political interpretation at the beginning of it. And there was also concern that really this should have been left to news and current affairs. So both Carson Country and the Legion Hall bombing demonstrating just how difficult it was to make a drama that was contemporary, that was a play for today, and was about Northern Ireland. The other aspect of it was also very difficult to go to Northern Ireland and make a play for the day. Johnny was talking about the Cheviot and the Stag, the Peter McDougall plays. Part of the greatness of Just a Boy's Story, Just Another Saturday, is that John Mackenzie was shooting on the streets of Glasgow and Greenock. But it wasn't possible to do that in the case of Belfast or the rest of the north of Ireland. Sadly, the Dandelion Clock, made in 1975, no longer exists, but it was originally commissioned to be shot on film in Belfast. The documentation shows, however, that there was concerns about the safety of filming Belfast, and many of the BBC staff based in London were actually reluctant to go to Belfast. The result was that it was remade, or made for the first time, as it were, as a studio play in London. Peter Lennon then made the comment it had the makings of a superb film, but was only granted a tatty studio production. Now, I don't know that it necessarily needed to be tatty, but it was certainly lost some of its ambition by being made in a studio in London. So in comparison to the English regions and the work of English regional drama, in comparison to Scotland, the possibilities of actually going to Northern Ireland were severely limited. This meant that the very few plays that were made during the 1970s didn't really go there, and in some sense might be said to deal with Northern Ireland rather obliquely. And I have to pay tribute here to Ken Trodd, if he's still here, because he was a producer, and probably the only producer for a while who was consistently trying to do something that was Irish related. I think Taking Leave has been already remembered, which again I have a certain fondness for. It does have a few scenes set in Belfast, but not, I think, shot there, because it's dealing with a British soldier who's returning home, and it's largely a family drama in which the soldier returns home on leave, and the Northern Ireland theme isn't properly integrated into the play. Though I do have a softness for it. It's directed again by John Mackenzie, the great Scottish director that Johnny's just been referring to, and he does an expert job of making this domestic drama highly interesting. But it is a dysfunctional family, and why I have a bit of a soft spot for that. Subsequent plays like Chance of a Lifetime, which was mentioned this morning, usually see the being sent to Northern Ireland as a terrible catastrophe for the family, and later plays about Northern Ireland, everybody wants to escape from there. This is the only play I know where the British soldier seems to prefer life in the army in Belfast to the awfulness of the relationships within his own family. The other play that's mentioned is Your Man from Six Counties, again a Ken Prod production, written by Colin Welland. It does have some footage at the beginning that was shot in Belfast. I suspect it was probably only a day or so shooting there. It's mostly shot on the other side of the border. And although it deals with attitudes to the Northern conflict, in some sense, my reading of it, it's partly about an internal debate between traditional nationalism and class politics in the south of Ireland. But it is a fine piece of location filming that I suspect could only be shot within the Republican Ireland, and I don't think it would have been feasible to shoot a comparable drama in the north. From 1977 onwards, though, you do begin to get the beginnings of the first location shooting in Northern Ireland. And again, two of these are Ken Trod productions. The Last Window Cleaner was made in collaboration with BBC Northern Ireland, although a large part of its studio. There's location shooting in Belfast. Shadows on Our Skin, made in 1980, is shot in Derry. And Stuart Parker, the local Northern Ireland playwright, who was partly cultivated by BBC Northern Ireland and who produced a short video play of his, had location shooting in Catchpenny Twist, and Aris in the Traffic is almost completely shot on location in Belfast. So you begin to get towards the end of the 70s a gravitation towards shooting on location, though these are all external projects coming out of London rather than local production. What really happens then in the early 1980s is that BBC Northern Ireland sees the success of plays like the Stuart Parker plays and thinks maybe we could make our own plays. Chris Parr becomes the head of drama there and becomes their first head of drama at BBC Northern Ireland. And they begin to produce material out of Northern Ireland. So it's really only at the tail of Play for Today that BBC Northern Ireland gets in on the act of drama production. And of course, it has a stunning degree of success with the Billy plays. And I've shamelessly stolen from John's documentary there because he's put all three of the titles beside each other. Now, I'm not going to talk about the Billy play, so sorry if any of you are expecting me to, because in a sense, I think that's a turning point in Northern Ireland drama. And I suppose what I was trying to argue in this is actually it's the forgotten 70s that I find rather interesting, that you get the kind of things that Play for Today are memorable for, formally innovative work, plays that are trying to tell the story of the Troubles through a range of forms and styles and devices, and in doing so, depart from the conventional television view of the Northern Ireland Troubles, the bombings and the shootings, as the Radio Times put it in a special feature. So what I thought I'd do is I just finish really with my three Northern Ireland plays from the 70s, which I think deserve more attention and, as it were playing and discovering ways of telling stories about Northern Ireland before, as it were, the conventions of the Troubles drama settled in and began to sediment. The first, and you're probably sick of hearing about Parson Country now, Dominic Behan's play. This is a work influenced by Brett, by Theatre Workshop. It's primarily shot in the studio, though it does have some archive material intercut with it. And it is, I think, a superb piece of self-conscious, studio-based television production, combining surface verisimilitude with stylized tableau, song interruptions, and a kind of mixing of formal devices. It also has the great merit of trying to offer a class-based analysis of the conflict that straddles the sectarian divide, and therefore seems to me one of the most interesting plays to have emerged about the conflict in Northern Ireland. My other selection is, and I can't see the chat at the moment, but I'm sure a few key hands are going to hit the keyboard saying this must be a nomination for one of the worst play for today's. It is another Ken Trodd production, and I have to say, I think it is a bit of a failure, and I don't think it's really fit viewing for today, but I do actually rather enjoy it for its ambition. It was written by Ron Hutchinson, who was from Belfast, but was living in Birmingham and had been commissioned by Pebble Mill for his first play, The Out of Towners, I think it's called. And he was commissioned to do this Last Window Cleaner, which, as we know, is partly shot in Belfast. And it concerns a dim-witted policeman, Ken Campbell, who's sent to Belfast under the initial assumption that he's going to Leicester to gather intelligence on terrorism. This is a completely black, absurdist, exaggerated take on the Troubles, which tries to suggest that everybody's been living with the Troubles too long and they're caught in their own fantasies and stereotypes. It was described by some viewers as incomprehensible, and I think it probably was for a lot of them. It's got a lot of local humor in it. It's making jokes that I think are quite specific by the Belfast singer Ruby Murray. As you can see from my stills, it's making joke about paramilitaries. After a press conference, one of the spokespeople for the paramilitaries is selling car stickers saying, "I have spoken to the men of violence." And given we've had a discussion about race and ethnicity, I could probably give a dishonourable mention to the appearance of Norman Beaton, who plays the only black officer in the Royal Ulster Constabulary. He's moved from the Midlands to escape discrimination there, but he relishes discriminating against Catholics and homosexuals in the north of Ireland. And there's much joke about the failure of Northern Ireland to extend the legalisation of homosexuality to that particular part of the UK. So I think just in terms of sheer ambition, it's departure from what you conventionally expect drama to be. I do want to draw that to your attention. It seems to me an honourable failure, something that really tried to do something different and probably falls a bit flat on its face, but certainly a genuinely forgotten piece. And finally, and I know this is much more admired by people, and John featured it in his documentary. Stuart Parker was the local boy made good. His Catchpenny Twist was his first play for today, which was much less successful and didn't entirely succeed in integrating studio drama with film. Harriet and the Traffic and Ruby O'Rain, from a largely shot on location in Belfast, it explicitly borrows from James Joyce's Ulysses. It's a kind of female variant of the Odyssey of two Belfast women who have this series of emblematic encounters going through the city. So it's extraordinary in one way because it tries to make the Troubles less extraordinary and put a new emphasis on the ordinary and the everyday, and it includes with a particular appeal to female solidarity. So my argument is the 70s was a difficult period. There was censorship. It was very difficult to shoot on location in Northern Ireland, but certain plays did get made. And actually, although those plays are more or less written out of the history of Northern Ireland drama, I think they are not all great plays, but they are certainly very interesting plays that deserve to be remembered and, as it were, add to our knowledge of all the kind of post-Billy plays that followed in its wake. And most history of television drama in Northern Ireland tends to begin with the 1980s. What I'm suggesting is it should begin more firmly with the 1970s and look at seriously at some of these plays from the 1970s. I'll finish there. Thanks very much.